I know I've joked either on this show or on weekends before that I talk about Bernie Sanders so much that if you were playing a drinking game based on how often I mentioned Bernie, you would probably like be dead of alcohol poisoning already. Apologies, I am going to talk about Bernie again. There are a couple different reasons why he has been on my mind lately. The first is, I think I've mentioned before that I recently moved to Albuquerque. So I've just been walking around and, trying to get to know my new neighborhood. And on my walks, I've noticed in the area where I live, quite a few cars that have both Bernie 2016 and Bernie 2020 bumper stickers side by side. So I'm always excited to see that. I'm always happy to see that. And then the other reason why I was thinking about Bernie is because some of you probably saw that there was a really great interview with Bernie in the New York Times. He had an interview with the columnist Maureen Dowd, and he basically showed up to the interview with like a paper list of topics that he just refused to deviate from. So it was like the spending bill, healthcare, paid family leave, just classic Bernie stuff. And every time that Maureen Dowd would try to ask him about something else, like I think she tried to bring up like Dua Lipa or like Joe Manchin's houseboat. Bernie would just unabashedly pivot back to the list, which of course I think is very classic Bernie. Like he's done this time and time again. And it actually reminded me of what I think is his greatest pivot of all time. This happened back in 2016 when he was on the campaign trail. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was one incident where a group of topless protesters crashed his campaign event, right? And afterwards, a reporter like asked him about it. Like a reporter was like, hey, like, did you see there was like this one woman and she like had something written across her bare chest. Did you happen to see what that was? And according to BuzzFeed, Bernie, let me bring up the quote here. Bernie seamlessly pivoted. Sanders then seamlessly pivoted from the subject of the woman's breasts to his economic message. No, actually, I was trying to focus on a couple of other things, he said. And what we were focusing on is the disappearance of the American middle class, the fact that almost all new income and wealth is going to the top 1%, and that we need to create an economy that works for all of us and not just wealthy campaign contributors. So this, again, I love this. I mean, like I said, it's just super classic Bernie. And, I guess just thinking about Bernie, it has kind of made me think about how, I think in the wake of his 2020 campaign, because of, the end of his campaign and, of course, the onset of the pandemic, the left is kind of in a lull in this moment, right? Like, I feel like things are pretty rudderless. And so just thinking about Bernie, made me think about that and also made me think about what I think is so remarkable about his two campaigns, even though, of course, he did not win. And, the best way I can put it is that I sometimes joke that Bernie de-radicalized me. I actually once said this to Bhaskar, and he pointed out, I think fairly, that the word de-radicalize like kind of makes it sound like you're in Al-Qaeda. Of course, I promise I was not in a terrorist cell. What I mean is that Bernie's run for president in 2016 was really significant because the left was so weak and so disconnected from any kind of political power in the US at that time or prior to his run that I think it was really easy if you were a leftist to just take these extremely radical positions because there was really no hope of any of it coming to fruition in any real way, right? The stakes, I don't think, were just low. I think that they were completely non-existent. So what I mean is prior to 2016, it was really easy to go around, saying things like full communism now or like abolish work or, like I would obsess over these extremely obscure academic theories or even fetishize the very idea of marginality. And I think the kind of worst thing was that being immersed in this style of radicalism, which of course had no real world channel whatsoever, also sort of led to glamorizing like extremely confrontational or even antisocial behavior, like Weather Underground style, revolutionary violence, or being really into the idea that the left should like arm itself to the teeth for future revolutionary activity. And obviously for the 99, for the vast majority of people who are into this so-called radicalism, including myself pre-Bernie, it's just talk, right? Like it might seem exciting and even militant, but the truth is that this is just posturing. I mean, I probably don't have to tell anyone that, anybody on the internet who's like, well, fuck around and find out, is probably just sitting at home. And I guess the point is not that, people are blowhards or they're showing off or whatever. I think what I'm trying to get at is that this kind of posturing or this position comes from a place of total powerlessness and even nihilism. Because when you feel like there's no possibility for even the most basic social and economic reforms, it's kind of like, why not embrace the most esoteric concepts and embrace these like totally unachievable or extreme positions, right? Now, why did this happen? Well, we know that the labor movement and the social safety net in the US have both been steadily eviscerated by free market champions on both sides of the aisle for decades, right? The Democratic Party has drifted to the right on economic policy over basically the last 40 or 50 years. And what this means is that since the 1970s, the left has essentially been confined to only these niche activist spaces and the academy. And I think after so many years of just complete marginalization and decline, we really had no clear model on the left of what electoral success could even look like until Bernie ran in 2016. So, he runs in 2016, and I think that things changed. I think that his insurgent bid for the presidency, I think it went a lot further than anybody thought it would. He basically became the most popular politician in the US over a very short period of time. And I think that those factors, more than like any radical book about, say, post-work or like communist automation or like abolishing the family or whatever, actually showed us what is possible beyond our current, like completely bleak moment of rampant economic inequality. I think our friend Matt Karp has put it really well. Last year on Twitter, he wrote, "Bernie lost, but over 5 years, he gave the feeble American left a precious gift, a common program based on ambitious universal economic demands, Medicare for all, college for all, jobs for all, and a common politics based on a fierce rejection of billionaire class rule. These are things the US left has never had before in this century, not after the battle in Seattle in 99, not after the crash in 08, not after Occupy in 11 or Ferguson in 14. Bernie's program and Bernie's politics showed that a left of thousands can become a left of millions." Now, obviously, I agree completely. And I just want to say, of course, don't get me wrong, Bernie becoming president and Bernie's platform becoming policy was always a long shot. I don't think anybody had any illusions otherwise. That said, I do think it was still the best opportunity that the left has had in decades to try to make life a little less punishing for working people today. And I think if you're a socialist today, you essentially have two tasks at hand. So one is, of course, the work of trying to make radical left ideas popular. You might call this consciousness raising, or you could call it, building class consciousness among the working class. And I think over the last several decades, the left has tended to spend a disproportionate amount of its time and energy on this part. And of course, again, it's precisely because we have had no political power, and it's really the only thing that we've been able to do, right? Education, trying to get the message out there, trying to shift the Overton window, as some people say. But I actually think that post-Bernie, the more important task, which unfortunately is also the more difficult task, is finding a way of actually amassing power so we can transform any existing public goodwill toward left ideas into reality. So what I mean is, after 2016, we basically know that there are parts of Bernie's platform that are incredibly popular, right? So things like raising the minimum wage, Medicare for all, paid family and sick leave, other forms of, social spending, increased spending on infrastructure. These are all ideas that currently have pretty widespread and robust public support, and often across party lines. So if we look at something like Medicare for all, the challenge that we're facing when it comes to implementing Medicare for all actually is not an ideological battle of trying to convince, the masses that our current healthcare system is incredibly broken and like cruel and dysfunctional. I think that most people already know from personal experience that healthcare in the US is just like does not work, and in many cases is outright barbaric, right? So what that means is our main obstacle to winning Medicare for all is unfortunately the political system itself. It isn't about changing hearts and minds necessarily. It's about finding a way to build enough working class power to actually overcome the policymakers and just the other elites who are incredibly hostile to the idea of single payer healthcare, despite what the majority of their constituents want. We have to find a way to confront the ruling class, in other words. So, when I say that Bernie, quote, deradicalized me, I don't think it doesn't mean that he made me more centrist or more moderate. I'm sure there are some people who see it that way. But what I'm actually talking about is that for me, and I think for many others, his two campaigns demonstrated that we really need to think seriously about political strategy, and also that left politics is not or should not be about being the most radical person in any given room, right? Or even cultivating a vanguard. I think that Bernie showed us that it's possible to craft a majoritarian politics around the kind of world that we want. And just to kind of wrap up, if I haven't said it explicitly before, I personally think that the most important political project of our time in the US right now is Medicare for All. Of course, this was a campaign that was kind of jump-started by Bernie. And as he has pointed out many times, the reason Medicare for All is important isn't just that our for-profit healthcare system is cruel and dysfunctional and it kills people, although of course, as I said before, all those things are true. But Medicare for All is also crucial because it's a program that would really help shift power away from a small number of employers to the vast majority of workers. And it does this, of course, by simply reducing the need for workers to stay in bad jobs in order to keep their employer-sponsored healthcare. Medicare for All would make being unemployed far less harrowing. And I think we also have like a few studies that show that it would probably raise a lot of people's wages. So for me, after Bernie, I think when we're deciding where and how we're going to commit our political energy, I think that the very first question that we start with has to be the question, will this help transfer power to the working class? Not is this radical, or is this going to overthrow capitalism tomorrow, or even like, is this reformist? But rather, as I said, will this transfer power to the working class? And I think that Bernie's two campaigns really helped clarify what our priorities should be in this regard. And I also want to say that I do think that he helped lay a partial blueprint for how to win. Now, of course, he did not win. So again, this blueprint is only partial. But that said, I do think that there is a lot that we can take away from his strategy. So I think among Bernie fans, the high point of his campaign in 2020 is often thought of as right after the Nevada caucus, right? He won that caucus. It was like a tough and ugly fight, but he came out on top. And I think, it really looked like he was picking up steam. And then, of course, there was the disappointment of Super Tuesday. But I also want to point out, on Super Tuesday, he won California. And I actually think that this doesn't get talked about enough, but I think it's really important. Why? Because California is the most populous and most diverse state in the US, first of all. But the second reason, and I think this is more important, the way that he won was just unbeatable ground game. And part of that ground game included going really going to blocks of voters or blocks of people who lots of politicians had kind of written off. So he very heavily canvassed and did outreach in Latino neighborhoods, in Asian American neighborhoods. And these are two racial groups that actually politicians tend to ignore quite a bit. It's kind of a, sick cycle where it's especially with Asian Americans, the idea is like, oh, well, they don't vote, turnout is low, so like why would we reach out to them? Bernie threw that by the wayside. Like I said, canvassed heavily among these two groups and won them. He won a lot of working class voters, actually. He, as I said, won the state. And so, again, I think that even though, it has to be said again, he didn't win. There is a lot that we can take away. And just to kind of wrap up on, the subject of radicalism or like de-radicalization, I just, of course, have to invoke that when Bernie talks about his platform, he, of course, very famously often says, these ideas are not radical. And I personally think that that is a perfect way of approaching politics.
Very well said. I'm back. Sorry about that.
You arrived just in time.
Right. Yeah. And I caught a lot of what you said. I think that's really well said. And I think, while it's true that these social democratic ideas and policies aren't radical, I think it's also true that in this moment, for me, fighting for social democracy is the thing radicals, if you care about that label, should do at this moment. And, after Bernie, there was a lot of like pessimism on the left, or a lot of talk about, should we be pessimistic or optimistic? And maybe I'm delusional or a little crazy, but I actually thought our takeaway after Bernie should have been pretty optimistic. I think the takeaway was, wow, we're on to something here. These ideas are popular. There's a base for them. We need to keep campaigning around them. We can become more rooted in working class communities and institutions. We can now have a basis to reestablish that connection between the left and labor. And yes, these policies are basic in many ways. Like we should have won these things 80 years ago, but It's like, so what? This is where we are. And I think, it's radical to think about not just about what you're fighting for, but who you're moving to fight for something. Like what constituencies can you actually move to fight? And that is what's going to set the stage for winning more in the future. And, in this country, we're starting from a very low level of class consciousness and class organization. We know we've never had a viable labor party. We're still at the fundamental point of what some people call like class formation, or just getting more working class people to act as a class for itself. And so for me, what this means is like our immediate tasks are things like getting more people in unions, more people to experience successful strikes, more campaigns winning tax the rich ballot initiatives, which we've talked about on the show before, more unions endorsing Medicare for all, more candidates who are, working class champions winning in like Republican rural districts, renewable energy projects that are using union labor. And like none of these things are necessarily revolutionary. And you might think these are pretty basic, but I think these are like the necessary prerequisites before we can really start going for more. And I think, as limited as electoral politics are, I think it forced many of us on the left to start thinking more seriously about politics. And Jane McAlevey talks a lot about the importance of yes or no or up and down campaigns. So campaigns with a clear definition of winning and losing. So workers either vote in the majority to join the union or they don't. The ballot initiative either wins or it doesn't. And I think like this electoral campaign forced us to think about, okay, why is this community or demographic not won over to the message? What do we have to do to move a certain constituency? And usually you'll find the answer has nothing to do with sloganeering or posturing or being the most radical. And I think, elections kind of register the mood of the country. And I think this election showed there's a lot of potential for leftists, actually. But we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And that work is not going to look like Russia in 1917. At least I don't think so. I mean, it's probably going to look more like the workers.
Oh, you're not storming the Winter Palace after this?
I'm not. I mean, if other people do it, I'll tag along. But, it's probably going to look more like a protracted period like the Workers' Party in Brazil, which built up, first it started in a region and built up literally over decades to the point now where they, got in power and can do some things. But so that's going to require staying focused on these important reforms for a long period of time. And that's hard enough. I mean, can we start and like I hate to use like a corny sports analogy, but it's like I haven't played basketball in years. Like my first goal, if I want to play again, I'm not going to like try to get into the European leagues. Like maybe I should like try to beat my brother in the game of
Yeah, I was
one-on-one
gonna say
first.
start with horse.
Yeah, you know. So, and I don't know. I mean, I guess it sucks that maybe we're at a more elementary level, but like, I guess the
That's where
good
we
news,
are.
yeah, I mean, and actually, the good news of that is that it kind of simplifies our tasks. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
we're not in power yet. We don't need to like worry about how we're not going to sell out yet. Like,
Hmm.
how about we like increase union density to like 20%? That'd be
Right.
cool.
Right. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Agree totally. And I want to add, because you brought up earlier this idea that right after Bernie, it was kind of like, should we be pessimistic? Should we be optimistic? I agree with you. I felt pretty optimistic. I mean, it obviously like sucked a lot that he, didn't win in 2016 and didn't win in 2020. Like, there's no, like, I don't obviously, like, I'm not trying to say like I feel great because the like real success was the friends that we made during the campaign or whatever, like that corny line.
right.
Like, I don't believe that. Like, it was a devastating blow. But I think, on the subject of optimism, or maybe I should say like tempered optimism, um, something else I was thinking is like the flip side of the coin of like radical leftist nihilism, where you're just like basically like with your guns and like ready for the revolution and, just like default to the most like radical or like nihilistic or extreme left position you can think of. I think that the flip side to that coin is a kind of like weird over optimism or triumphalism, I guess, where like, you know, and actually, like, unfortunately, like, I think that like lots of people still kind of fall into this, and I myself may fall into it at times as well. But it's kind
Mm,
of like, like a big strike happens, right? Or like, Bernie like won one caucus, or or like the like when the NBA players went on strike during the
right.
Black Lives Matter protests. I think sometimes there's a lot of talk where it's like, oh, like things are really like kicking off, and there's often an implication that a group of oppressed or exploited people, whether that's like blue collar working class people or like Black people as a racial group, are just like already revolutionary and just like
Right.
waiting to kick off if we would just remove the boot from their neck. And I don't think that kind of left dialogue or discourse is healthy either. And I actually think that Bernie was sort of able to, like, at least for me, like, help me become clearer eyed about like who people are and what their politics and what their interests are. As I think I've said many times on this show, people are actually pretty idiosyncratic.
Right.
So like, we brought this up before, you can have a voter in Florida who will vote to raise the minimum wage to $15, but will also vote for Trump. I think people are just less sort of predictable than we sometimes make them out to be. And of course, I hope it goes without saying that just because you're blue collar or, Black or a person of color, like in some kind of like historically marginalized group, like doesn't mean that you are radical. And I think that sometimes the left, maybe not purposely, but has kind of inadvertently like promulgated that narrative.
Right. Yeah. And because it's kind of an easier narrative because I think an organized constituency has to be built.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm,
not like ready made, and I
mm-hmm,
think, and again, like the electoral realm kind of teaches like, okay, you got to start getting into some of the messy politics of that, and it's like, okay, why didn't we have our Jim Clyburn there in a position that, I mean, that happened over decades, that
mm-hmm,
couldn't have been. I sometimes get in some arguments with people about South Carolina, like, well, if Bernie would have done this, if he would have shaken more hands with this person or that
mm-hmm.
person, it's like, well, no, I mean, he had a few months essentially to like
Right.
try and overturn the hegemony of the Democratic Party establishment that's been built for generations,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I don't consider myself a Maoist, but I think the concept
Oh, the
that
truth is out.
right, the
No, I'm just
concept
kidding.
that I love of protracted struggle on all fronts, I think is actually extremely relevant, and we can adopt it for where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a very protracted, you know, level of engagement in
Mm-hmm.
different areas of politics that to really like move forward.
I have a really quick question for you because you have been an organizer, a labor organizer prior to Bernie, through Bernie, and of course after Bernie. I'm not sure if you were active in DSA before Bernie, but I think you were, right? Like you're an OG.
Actually, no, DSA
Oh, okay.
specifically through Bernie, but
Okay. But you
yeah,
were involved
socialist
in like,
politics
yeah,
broadly, yeah,
yeah.
before then, yeah.
So I am wondering if you feel like the left right now post Bernie is kind of back to where it was before Bernie, or has something changed, or what is different about it?
Well, I don't think it's gone back. I still think we're in a better position now. That's not saying much. I mean, again, literally, people need to remember like 2013 is like, holy shit, we got 20 socialists in a room.
Right.
We are
Right.
we are on to something. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think yeah, we definitely cleared some hurdles. I don't think we're back to then, but I
Hmm.
think, and this is something, Adolf Rita said to me a lot about, what he was hoping would happen during Bernie was like people would view it kind of soberly as like an organizing opportunity.
Hmm.
And, and that kind of rang true for me because like through the Labor for Bernie work we did, we established a lot of contacts of unions that we still work with today
Hmm.
on things like Medicare for all or different things. So I don't think enough of that opportunity was grabbed. I think, in certain areas of the country, yes, in certain cities, certain regions. But yeah, I think we are at a point of being like a little rudderless and kind of all over the place and going from one thing to the next. And what I kind of hope was like, again, Bernie, yes, the Hail Mary was that he won, but like more importantly, he kind of established like, okay, here is a whole slew of policies that I've just proven are very popular. Even though I didn't win, I proved they're very popular, and now let's like keep organizing around them.
Right.
So again, I think that's happened in some ways, but not in others. But I do think we're still in a better place than we were in the dark pre-Bernie days.
Right. The dark ages.